IMT, AMT, DCT, CVT, AT, MT. Well, the list of transmission options for mass market cars today is just growing and growing. Now in August of 2018, I brought you an in-depth understanding of just how each of these transmissions works. So to check it out, click in the link in the description below. But today, we are here to discuss Hyundai's new IMT gearbox. Now IMT stands for Intelligent Manual Transmission, and in essence, this is a semi-automatic gearbox. So we've called in the other types of transmissions within this segment to gauge its performance. So let's get going. Now Hyundai's new intelligent manual transmission. Well, this involves essentially the same 6-speed manual gearbox that is available in the 1-liter turbo petrol manual Venue. But the biggest change here is that there is no clutch pedal. Instead, you can simply shift gears seamlessly without even thinking of a clutch action. Now the IMT has something called a transmission control unit or TCU. This involves a hydraulic actuator much like that of an AMT gearbox, and then there is also an intention sensor. What does the intention sensor do? Well, every time you move the gear lever by so much as 10%, it engages the clutch and disengages drive to the wheels. This allows it to perform a gear change. The IMT gearbox, in theory, allows drivers the joys of an engaging driving experience associated with a manual transmission without the hassles of having to clutch in and out constantly in heavy traffic. And one of the biggest benefits here is that, like an AMT, the IMT transmission too does not compromise fuel efficiency over a conventional manual transmission. But how does this work in the real world? Well, let's find out. So, how well does all of that technical automotive jargon work for the IMT when it comes to real-world drivability? Well, let me set you off right from the beginning. So, when you need to start the engine, the gearbox has to be in neutral and you have to depress the brake pedal. Only then will the engine fire up when you hit the starter button. Once that happens, your foot's on the brake, you engage first gear. As you gently let off the brake pedal, like an automatic car, it'll begin to creep forward. Now that is pretty cool, and it definitely feels like an automatic car. And then when you need to move up to second gear, all you need to do is hold the gear lever and put it into second gear. And just like that, the transmission has shifted gears. And then when you need to move up to third, it's just a shift away again. No clutch action, and it has to be said that this is very, very convenient. But I have to point out at this stage that gear shifts will feel a little jerky at first, and in order to get around them, you have to adapt to the AMT style of driving, or for that matter, the manual gearbox style of driving, which is every time you want an upshift or a downshift, every time you're shifting gears, you have to lift off the throttle pedal, and once the gear is engaged, then you get back on it again. If you do this, you will always get smooth gear shifts. So this then makes the IMT gearbox really, really convenient to use in town. Honestly, at just 20,000 rupees premium over the manual counterpart, this IMT really does appear to be a boon for our urban driving conditions. What's more, because this is essentially the manual gearbox itself, fuel efficiency is just as good as the manual models. So what's the catch? Is there a downside to this IMT? Well, of course, like every transmission, this one too has its downsides. For instance, when you're really driving hard and if you're an enthusiastic kind of driver, that's when every time you push it to the limit, you'll be greeted with a jerky gear shift. There's just no way around it. If you want to smoothen out that gear shift, you will have to carry out a slower gear change. Also, it is impossible to launch this car from standstill. It will not entertain any sort of clutch slipping action, simply because you have no control over the system. So like Hyundai's DCT gearbox, this one too does not allow wheel slip and instant acceleration from standstill. But coming back to the benefits of the IMT, well, you cannot stall this car even if you're in a higher gear. So supposing I'm in 4th gear and I come to a standstill, there's just the slightest hint of a shudder, but nothing more. And then when I come to a halt, the car starts beeping. And if I try to let go of the brake and get on the throttle again, the car will not move. So in that case, I have to shift to a lower gear and then set off. So I tried it out, and you can set the car off from standstill in first gear and second gear, but no higher. Coming back to the gearbox itself, now speaking of setting off, it's worth noting that the Imt Gearbox has hill hold assist and hill start assist. So if I park on an incline and let go of the brake pedal, the car is not going to roll back. And when I get on the throttle, the car will gently move forwards up a hill, or backwards up a hill for that matter, and will not stall at all. So in that sense, the IMT is a great gearbox. It has a huge convenience factor as well. And I think once people try this gearbox out, I think there'll be a lot of takers for the IMT equipped Hyundai Venue. Moving on to how the Venue IMT behaves on the road, well, the 1-liter turbo petrol engine from Hyundai is fairly good in terms of drivability higher up the rev band. So there is a fair amount of turbo lag from 1000 RPM onwards when you set off. It gets better once you reach 1500 RPM, but turbo lag is still evident at that stage. And it's only at 2000 RPM when the turbo fully spools and you get a strong surge of power. This surge of power stays with you all the way past 5000 RPM, and that's when it begins to taper off. Having said that, the engine still allows you to push on to 6500 RPM. In terms of performance and out-and-out drivability, this 1-liter turbo petrol engine does like to rev, and its thrummy 3-cylinder engine note in the lower reaches of the power band does tend to get better as you reach higher up the rev range. Now the car we're driving is the new sport variant of the Venue, and this one gets a lot of sporty styling accents such as red color inserts all over the exteriors of the car, and when you step inside, there are red accents on the HVAC controls and around the air vents. What's more, you even get sporty GTI style seat covers. There's also this new steering wheel which looks very familiar to the one in the new Hyundai Creta. So with this, Hyundai now has a wide range of transmission options for the Venue. There's the manual, there's the DCT, and now there's the IMT. So if you're in the market for a compact SUV, Hyundai literally spoils you silly with the wide range of variations that the Venue is available in. So on the whole, I have to say that the IMT is a welcome addition to the mass market segment, and I really hope to see it being incorporated by other car manufacturers as well. Now it's time to move on from the Venue's powertrain to the other new powertrain in this comparison test. Maruti Suzuki's Vitara Brezza has just gained its 1.5-liter petrol engine that is equipped with a mild hybrid system. And not just that, the powertrain brings with it Suzuki's 4-speed torque converter automatic gearbox. 4-speed torque converter. That feels like the 1990s to me. A 4-speed box is, there's no two ways about it. Everybody's going to look at it as an outdated unit. But you know what? Perhaps the largest car maker in India knows what they're doing. This automatic transmission is built to last a lifetime. It is a very reliable unit, and it is very, very smooth, very, very refined to drive. In fact, I just want to highlight this, that I recently also drove this powertrain in the S-Cross, and in that car, I felt that it had a higher NVH as compared to the Vitara Brezza. So that's a good thing for the Brezza. Now, no matter what kind of automatic transmission you can bring to the market, the good old Slushmatic is still king of the hill. Torque converter automatic gearboxes are not just reliable, but they're also very, very smooth and very, very comfortable to drive. So despite the advancement of double clutch automatic transmissions, car makers such as Audi are slowly moving back to the S-tronic torque converter gearboxes, even for their high performance models. Now that says something on its own. So with this new powertrain setup, the Vitara Brezza has transformed from a mechanical, high NVH kind of driver's car to a more sedate and comfortable offering. It's much more quiet in here now, thanks to the petrol engine, and this gearbox just makes your drives seamless. Under normal driving conditions, you can't tell how many gears this gearbox has, and it's just totally smooth. There are no manual changes that you can do here. There's no Tiptronic mode, nothing. You gotta let the gearbox do its own thing at all times. And you know what? That's not a bad thing at all, because the gearbox goes about its business absolutely effortlessly. Downsides? Well, I do wish for faster kickdown responses. That is something that this transmission is simply not capable of, when you're driving in a highly spirited manner. But perhaps where you do miss a fifth gear or even a sixth gear is when you're cruising out on highways. That's when NVH tends to be louder at triple-digit speeds because, you're always driving around in fourth gear. Also, a higher gear would allow the car to have better fuel efficiency while cruising on long-distance journeys, or even today's ring roads or expressways during our intercity travel. For example, if you live in New Delhi and work in Gurgaon, well, you could have done with a higher gear for better fuel efficiency in your everyday driving. Coming to the engine itself, well, because this is a naturally aspirated petrol engine and a 4-cylinder one at that, there's none of that 3-cylinder thrumminess, and the engine is always smooth and quiet and refined. And because there's no turbocharger, there's no lag either. This engine develops a maximum of 103 bhp and 138 Nm of peak torque. Now that's lower than all of the other turbocharged cars here. Do you feel the lack of power? Not at all. Of course, revving the nuts off a turbocharged manual XUV300 petrol is a different matter. But as far as real-world drivability is concerned, you don't feel the lack of power at all. I would say that this car has adequate power. I was a little apprehensive about this because the Brezza is a heavy car, but power delivery is seamless, and on the whole, amongst all of the cars here, the Vitara Brezza, because it has a traditional torque converter automatic gearbox, this definitely is the most convenient and the smoothest driving car amongst all of them here. And if you've been following our autoX channel or been on autoX.com or reading our magazines, you would have read my reports on just how fuel efficient Maruti's 1.5-litre mild hybrid powertrain can be. So on that account, despite having a power-sapping torque converter automatic gearbox, I would have to say that there's still hope for the Vitara Brezza to be a reasonably fuel-efficient car. Right, so the AMT gearbox, well, as I've mentioned in earlier reviews of AMT cars, well, you have to be a little skillful while handling these machines, in the sense that every time you want an upshift, you gotta lift off the throttle pedal and gently come back on, and the transmission automatically moves up a gear. And in case of downshifts, all you have to do is mash the throttle pedal. Having said that, Tata's AMT gearboxes need just a little bit more refinement for this functionality. But that aside, thanks to the Nexon's selectable drive modes, well, the AMT gearbox here always tends to hold on to revs a little bit more, and that ensures that you always have instant throttle response. So on that front, it's a good thing. It doesn't upshift as early as you would have liked, but the upside to that is that you always have enough power. Otherwise, once a gear is engaged, the AMT gearbox, because essentially it's the same manual gearbox, so it allows the engine to be very free revving in nature, which also allows the Tata Nexon to have clean acceleration runs. The only downside here is that once you're approaching the rev limiter, that's when you'll be met with a lurchy upshift. That's the only problem with this AMT gearbox, really. But that also is the case only when you're really pushing it. Trust me, in real world driving conditions, you won't even encounter it. And well, the benefit of an AMT transmission is that unlike an IMT, you don't even have to move your hands. The gearbox does its own thing. And on the whole, it's a very convenient automatic transmission to drive around in. And if you're still apprehensive about those gear changes, remember that an AMT automatic also has the same fuel efficiency as a manual gearbox. So despite all of the conveniences of driving an automatic car, it's not going to cost you anything extra on your wallet. Now, the Nexon's 1.2-litre petrol engine has also recently been updated with more power. And you know what? It shows the car feels quite sprightly, and a typical over-turbo petrol engine. There is a strong mid-range that this engine also likes to rev to the higher reaches of the rev band, and that makes this quite a competent highway car as well. Other benefits of the Nexon? Well, it has a 5-star NCAP safety rating. I've also always admired the Nexon for its high-speed stability. You know, this car sits very confidently on the road. Now with this power upgrade, Tata has also given this car a facelift, which has brought with it very attractive front-end styling that includes a set of new headlamps and a chunky front bumper. All of this combined with the fact that the Nexon's cabin is the most spacious in the compact SUV segment ensures that the Nexon is still a very strong contender in its class. Right, now that we've moved into the manual XUV300 petrol, how does it feel in comparison to an IMT now? Has the world changed? Is the IMT going to replace the good old manual transmission forever? I don't think so. Tell you what, the good old manual gearbox is here to stay, because enthusiasts and anyone who enjoys driving will always prefer a manual model, simply because of the instant nature. It's like second nature when you shift gears. It's all about controlling a piece of machinery by yourself. The moment you shift gears, the moment you throttle in, you know just how your car is going to behave on the road. And for that reason, there is no replacement for driving pleasure when it comes to a manual gearbox. As for the XUV300 6-speed manual gearbox, well, it has very light throws, it has very direct throws, so that's good. But what is not good is that the clutch travel action is really long and springy. So that can be a pain in stop-start traffic. Also, the gear throws themselves are quite long. Despite the fact that they are light in operation, they are quite long. Having said that, the moment you downshift and you land the engine in the meat of the power band at 2000 RPM, this engine will rev very happily all the way to 5000 RPM. The engine, in fact, will continue to push on towards 6000 RPM, but it tends to feel laborious at that point. Otherwise, the strong surge of turbo power allows you to ride a wave of torque, which then lands you in its peak power output. So because this is a turbocharged engine and it is also free revving in nature, so it's a lot of fun to push this car to the red line every time, because there is, after all, 108 bhp and 200 Newton meters of peak torque. So the XUV300 does feel like a powerful car for its class. And of course, there's the other benefit of driving a manual car, and that's called fuel efficiency. A manual transmission is always more efficient than an automatic transmission. And while AMTs and IMTs promise equivalent fuel efficiency figures as manual models, I have to say that it is ultimately the manual transmission which you can control the most for maximum fuel efficiency if that's your style of driving. Otherwise, well, the XUV300 sits well on the road, it feels confident, the steering is direct, but at the same time, I would have liked a certain heft to the steering wheel in terms of feel and feedback. Now in this segment, there are a lot of contenders, a lot of updated contenders as well, but the XUV300 continues to stand with its USPs in the segment, being its adjustable steering modes, its dual zone climate control and all of that. And given that under the bonnet there's a sprightly petrol engine, enthusiasts will be sure to consider the XUV300 petrol if they're looking for a fun-to-drive compact SUV. So which of these transmissions is best? Well, it's a simple price-to-benefit ratio over here. You see, while the IMT is a mere 20,000 rupees more than the manual counterpart, and you definitely have the convenience of not having to use a clutch pedal, the heavy gear shifts are a downside to the transmission, which otherwise actually is fairly brilliant. It's very comfortable on its own. But if you're going to choose the IMT, you should be aware of its downside. But the IMT is not the only transmission here with downsides. You see, the next one is AMT. Well, it's not as expensive as a conventional automatic, which is why it's fit in very well in the Indian market. But an AMT transmission can result in jerky gear changes and slow gear changes. Coming to the traditional 4-speed torque converter in the Vitara Brezza, well, I have to say that as an automatic transmission, it's still the good old Slushmatic that wins in terms of comfort and convenience. Of course, it's also the most expensive system, and the power-sapping nature of these torque converter gearboxes invariably means a lower fuel efficiency figure. But when it comes to the matter of fuel efficiency, let me be very honest here. These small capacity turbo petrol engines just aren't as efficient as naturally aspirated units. So whichever of these cars you choose, be well aware of the fact that they will tend to be thirsty. Now of course, Maruti Suzuki's mild hybrid powertrain greatly enhances fuel efficiency, which is perhaps the saving grace for the Vitara Brezza. But having said that, we just haven't had the time to test these cars in terms of the real-world fuel efficiency. But if it's efficiency you're after, be sure that it's the manual transmission you should be considering. For manual transmissions are the least taxing on powertrains. And what's more, you get a very free revving nature from a manual transmission equipped powertrain, which is why if you want a fun to drive car, be sure that it's also a manual that you need to go for. But having said that, given our ever-increasing traffic conditions and insane bumper-to-bumper traffic in our urban centers, well, it gives me great joy to tell you that as a buyer, you have so many options today. So now that you know the pros and cons of all of these transmissions, go out there and choose one that suits you best.